Hey guys, tonight we're heading back in time to a world where your bread might rise, but only if you heard the right bell ring first. Imagine this. It's still dark out, the kind of dark that feels soft and endless. You're already up, feet on cold stone, fingers stiff with morning chill, and the scent of smoke from the town's communal oven coils slowly through the air. The streets are quiet, but not still. There's a quiet hum to the village, the kind of anticipation that only comes from people who know the day's rhythm begins not with the sun, but with a bell. You wrap your shawl tighter, tug on your boots, and step outside. You're a baker, or more precisely, you're apprenticed to one. And today, you're going to time your entire routine with no watch, no timer, and certainly no smartphone. Your timer is an old iron bell hanging in the monastery tower just up the hill, and your challenge is this. Make enough bread for 100 people before compline, without burning anything or offending the priest. Oh, and don't mess up the tithe loaf. You probably won't survive that. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere far or somewhere cozy, post your location and local time. I love seeing how small the world gets at night. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge up the muddy path toward the village bakehouse. Your breath puffs in small clouds, the cold not yet giving way to the hearth's warmth. The faint clang of a monastery bell cuts across the air. Matins. It's early, barely 4 in the morning, and the monks have just begun their daily prayers. For you, it's a different kind of devotion, preparing the dough before the rest of the world is awake. The flour's already been sifted, coarse, slightly gray, flecked with husk, and maybe a bit of mystery. That's fine. You've learned not to ask questions about what's floating in the flour sack. Everyone swears it's just barley dust. You mix water into the flour, your hands moving through it with a quiet rhythm. No fancy yeast here, only a bit of old dough saved from yesterday, bubbling slightly, alive with wild yeast and hope. You fold, stretch, rest, fold again. The dough is heavier today. Maybe the air's damp. Maybe you're still sleepy. You wish you could check the time, but instead, you glance up toward the abbey on the hill. You don't need a sundial. That bell's going to tell you everything you need to know. Historians still argue whether bakers timed their kneading strictly by bells, or whether it was more about shared rhythm, how villagers internalized the monastic schedule over generations. But one thing's for sure, the bell was never just for prayers. It told the entire village when to rise, when to grind grain, when to bake, when to rest, and when to confess your sins, especially if you just overcooked the Lord's breakfast roll. You take a moment to rub your arms. The bakehouse is just ahead, a wide, low building that smells permanently of ash and yeast. Smoke curls lazily from the top. Inside, the oven is still warming. That's right, warming. Because in medieval times, ovens weren't like your convenient gas stoves. They had to be fired hours in advance, stone by stone absorbing the heat until the chamber glowed with an even, radiant warmth. And there's no knob to turn. You just hope the fire's been tended properly, and you listen for the next bell. In this village, like many others across Europe, the bells are everything. They're your schedule, your signal, your alarm clock. Monks might be praying, but you're waiting for the sext bell, the one that says, "Fire's hot enough, let's get that dough in." Of course, this means timing is delicate. Too early, and your dough won't rise. Too late, and the fire burns too low. It's a game of hot stones and holy sounds, And here's a fun fact. Some towns even developed unique bell patterns to signal different types of bread. 2 short chimes might mean rye. A long low toll, that's for festival loaves. Local kids could practically sing the bread schedule like a lullaby. But not everything's serene in your morning walk. A goat has wandered into the path, again, and it's chewing something that might once have been your laundry. You give it a light shove. It stares at you with the calm superiority only goats can muster, then continues munching. Inside the bakehouse, the head baker grunts a greeting. He's already elbow deep in dough, and his face is streaked with flour like war paint. He doesn't say much, but you've come to understand his moods based entirely on how hard he slaps the bread. Today looks average. You get to work shaping loaves, round ones for the village folk, long flat ones for the abbey, a few oddly decorative ones for Lady Matilda, who insists her bread look like a braid even if it tastes like a brick. One curious detail about medieval baking: bread wasn't just food, it was social currency. Your loaves reflected your class, your wealth, even your moral purity, if you believed the friars, which, let's be honest, was optional. The coarser the bread, the poorer you were. You, of course, get the coarsest. You try not to take it personally. Outside, the bell tolls again, this time deeper, more resonant. That's the cue. The oven's ready. And you, dough-covered and sleep-deprived, are about to start baking in a 500-degree stone box using a long wooden paddle and the strength of your upper back. There's no thermometer, no timer, no parchment paper, just intuition, calluses, and that bell on the hill. The oven yawns open like the mouth of a sleepy dragon, radiating heat you can feel in your teeth. You step back instinctively, wooden peel in hand, the shaped loaves balanced like sleepy passengers on a flat ferry boat. The head baker nods once, barely perceptible, his version of saying, "Get on with it." You've timed this precisely to the second bell of the day, the one that follows matins but precedes lauds. It's not marked by hour, but by habit. The monks just rang it, and that means you've got a 15-minute window to load as many loaves as humanly possible before the heat dips below optimal. Of course, optimal is a bit of a guess. No one has invented the kitchen thermometer yet. You judge the oven by the whiteness of the stone. If it's chalky and glowing faintly like the moon behind clouds, you're good. If it's black and still spitting embers, back off or lose your eyebrows. Again. So you slide the first loaves in. The peel jerks a little, too fast, and one of the rounds wobbles dangerously. You mutter something unholy and correct it with a quick jab. The loaf obeys, snuggling in next to its cousins. You move like someone who's done this 100 times, but still doesn't trust gravity. That's because you don't. From behind, the older baker is mumbling his personal calibration method, something about how the timing feels right in his knees. You're not there yet. You just go by the bell. Here's the strange thing. Medieval bakers didn't just use bells for timing loaves. Entire communities were structured around those ringing reminders. The bells marked not just prayer, but bathing hours, curfews, field rotations, even gossip schedules, if you listened close enough. Some historians argue that before mechanical clocks, these bells functioned as the only communal sense of time, and no one followed them more religiously than the bakers. After all, you couldn't just bake when you felt like it. The oven was shared, firewood was limited, and if your loaf wasn't in during your assigned bell window, tough luck, you'd be eating cold porridge again. You finish loading the oven. The last loaf goes in just as the door, a heavy, iron-framed slab, gets dragged into place. A thick bar locks it, sealing in the heat and steam. Now you wait, but not too long. About as long as it takes for the monks to finish lauds and start on prime. In the meantime, you wipe your hands on your apron and take in the early bustle of the bakehouse. There's a symphony of wooden tools scraping dough, the occasional grunt, and the ever-present rustle of flour sacks. A mouse scurries past your boot. It pauses, as if politely checking to see if you'll throw it a crumb, then vanishes under the table when you don't. The head baker leans over and checks the wall sundial. Useless indoors, obviously, but it's tradition. It faces a tiny window that catches maybe 30 seconds of sunlight each morning, assuming no fog. Today's cloudy. He shrugs. Somewhere in the distance, another bell tolls. A soft, lingering ring that echoes off stone walls. That's not for you. That one's for the scribes. They're probably sharpening quills and lamenting ink stains right about now. Pour them. As you wait, you prep the second batch. Different flour this time. Spelt and oat. Less temperamental, but heavier. You've been told it sticks to the ribs, which sounds unappealing, but it's meant as a compliment. You knead carefully, listening to the muffled thud of the head baker knocking on the oven door to check the echo. This was a real trick, knocking on hot stone to judge how hollow it sounded. Supposedly, a well-timed loaf made the oven walls thrum like a wine barrel. Or so he claims. You haven't heard it yet, but it makes him feel important, and so you nod solemnly. Another bell. Prime. Time to open the oven. The smell hits first. Earthy, rich, that deep toasted scent that makes you forget your fingers are covered in dough glue. You grab the peel again and reach in. The loaves are golden and proud, one or two with little blisters where the heat kissed them extra hard. Pulling them out requires speed and zero hesitation. The oven doesn't like indecisiveness. You jab, lift, slide, stack. 1, 2, 3, 17 loaves in all. Not bad. Only one has a small crack. It'll go to the miller. He won't notice. Probably. As you stack the bread on cooling racks, just wooden slats laid across barrels, you notice how the crusts harden almost immediately. There's a moment, right when the steam escapes, that they sing. Just a soft crackle, like paper being folded very slowly. You lean against the wall and take a breath. By now, most of the village is awake. Children are beginning to scamper through the muddy lanes. A dog barks half-heartedly. From the church tower, another bell rings. Tierce. That's the prayer bell for merchants, farmers, and smiths. But for you, it's second breakfast. You grab a heel of warm bread, the reject from earlier, and tear into it, still steaming. A little underbaked in the center, but still better than whatever the priest eats. You hear he insists on dried lentils soaked in vinegar. Probably explains a lot. The older baker joins you, silently breaking his own piece and chewing in solidarity. You don't talk. You don't need to. Bread speaks. Historians still argue whether this reliance on bells was born from religious discipline or simple necessity. Probably both. In a world without clocks, someone had to be the timekeeper, and the monks had nothing but time. You glance at the fresh dough rising quietly under linen. Soon, it'll be time for the second oven cycle. But first, a sip of cider, a moment of calm, and maybe, just maybe, a little prayer that the next batch sings as sweetly as this one. The dough under the linen is rising like a well-behaved child. Quietly, steadily, puffing up with the warm satisfaction of yeast doing its invisible work. You press a finger into it gently, and it bounces back just enough. Not too much, not too little. That's when you know it's ready to shape. You hum just a little and reach for the flour. The flour in your sack is coarse, uneven, speckled with bran. No one's invented the fine mesh sifter yet. Unless you're a noble with access to bolted flour, you're baking with what you've got. And what you've got is what the miller dragged in last Thursday, complaining about a lazy donkey and a crooked water wheel. You sprinkle it generously on the table. Today's batch will be round loaves, boules, easier to portion, easier to carry, and less likely to explode sideways in the oven. Yes, that's a thing. Ask any baker who's ever shaped a loaf with cold hands and a warm temper. A lopsided boule is the medieval equivalent of sending an embarrassing email and realizing it too late. You shape the dough with practiced flicks of your palms, rolling it back toward you across the flour-slicked table until its surface is tight, smooth, and just the tiniest bit smug. Then you score it. One clean slash across the top. That mark isn't just pretty. It controls how the loaf expands. Without it, the loaf decides where to burst, usually on the side, occasionally on your pride. As you shape, you notice the oven stone is still warm from the earlier batch. That's good. Less fuel needed. Firewood is always scarce, and buying from the charcoal vendor costs more than you make in a week. You're convinced he waters down his bundles, if that's even possible. Out the narrow window, a pale sun creeps up behind the church spire. There it is again, the bell. This time it's sext, mid-morning prayer. For you, it's not about prayer. It's a mental timer. This is when you place the newly shaped loaves in their proofing baskets and begin stoking the oven again. You do it without thinking. The bell rings, and your body moves. Here's the curious part. Even though the bells aren't accurate by modern standards, they vary with weather, echo, and lazy ringers. Your brain adjusts. Your body, somehow, knows that the second bell of sext means get your loaves in the baskets. You've internalized it. The head baker says it's muscle memory. The priest says it's divine guidance. You say it's flour in the lungs and sleep deprivation. But hey, who's counting? The fire crackles as you nudge new kindling into the hearth. Smoke curls upward. You squint through it, half listening to the wind carry the faint sound of goats from the edge of the village. Somewhere, a wife is already yelling at her husband for buying sour wine instead of bread. You'd feel bad if she weren't your aunt. Back inside, the loaves rest in willow baskets lined with linen. They look peaceful, like sleepy animals tucked into their nests. You cover them lightly, check the oven again, and toss in a pinch of flour to see how fast it darkens. It browns too quickly. Not ready. You wait. Again. This is the part they never tell you about in those romantic stories of artisan baking. The waiting. The long, flour-dusted silences. The way the air smells of yeast and wood smoke. How the minutes stretch like softened dough. You fill the silence by watching. You observe how the steam rises in tendrils. You listen to the pop of expanding wood. You stretch your aching fingers and try not to nap standing up. Historians still argue whether medieval bakers followed exact bell timings or relied more on intuition, shaped by years of bell hearing and dough handling. Probably a combination. After all, even if the bell rings a few seconds early, your dough won't argue. Unless it does. Bad flour, bad air, bad vibes. Dough is moody. The second bell of sext rings, thinner now, as if the wind is pulling it apart. That's your cue. With confident hands and flour-dusted sleeves, you lift each basket and gently tip the dough onto the peel. The loaves slump slightly, Normal. You slide them into the oven, one after another. The stone hisses softly as moist dough meets ancient heat. Door closed, oven sealed. Now. Wait. While you wait, you scrub the long wooden table. Dried bits of dough come off in curls. The table has scars, deep ones, where the head baker once slammed his kneading blade out of frustration during a flour shortage. You ran out mid-batch. He blamed the miller. The miller blamed the donkey. The donkey remained silent. Across the room, a young apprentice is grinding leftover crusts into meal for the poor. It's what happens to unsold bread here. No waste. Even crumbs get a second life. You watch him for a while. He's using a mortar that's older than both of you. It makes a rhythmic thunk that nearly lulls you to sleep. Almost. Then the best part. The smell begins to rise again. It starts subtle, barely there. Then it wraps around you like a warm blanket. It's nutty and sweet, with a faint tang from the fermenting grains. You sigh without meaning to. Another bell. Nones. The 9th hour, which, confusingly, is mid-afternoon. You unlatch the oven door. Inside, the loaves have risen with perfect spring. The slashes have opened like mouths mid-laughter. You reach in, retrieve them one by one. No cracks, no burns, no burst bottoms, a baker's miracle. You stack them like trophies, proud but humble. The kind of loaves that make villagers line up early tomorrow just to get the end crusts. You wipe your hands. The bell chimes again. Another one for the priest this time. You grin. You're already done. The loaves cool in the open air, lined up like sleepy golden turtles on the long wooden shelf. You run a hand just above them. Not touching, of course. The crusts are still fragile in their first minutes. The air rising from them is toasty and full of yeast and roasted grain. If scent could be a lullaby, this would be it. Your work is done for now. No more dough to shape. No more wood to haul. Just you, your bread, and the long afternoon stretching out before you like a lazy cat. You sit on a worn stool by the back door, where the light slants in just so, and listen to the sounds of the village. There's the clop of a cartwheel over cobblestones, the rustle of hens in the neighbor's yard, and beneath it all, the constant murmur of human life. Someone arguing about shoe sizes, someone coughing, someone singing off-key while chopping onions. This is the soundtrack of your world. You bite into a small test loaf you saved for yourself, still warm. The crust cracks satisfyingly under your teeth. The crumb inside is soft, open, just slightly chewy. You nod. Not bad for a baker who eyeballs oven timing by bells and gut feeling. And that's the magic of it, really. You don't have a kitchen timer. You don't even have a clock. What you have are bells, and your body, trained over years to respond to them like a living hourglass. You know what part of the dough's rise corresponds with the third toll of prime. You know how much firewood to add right after terce. You've baked through Lent and harvest festivals, plagues and feast days, weddings and sudden frosts. Through it all, the bells kept ringing. And here's the thing. They don't just tell time. They shape it. In a world without personal watches or pocket sundials, people in medieval towns lived by what's called canonical hours. 7 parts of the day marked by church bells, matins, very early or sometimes at night, lauds, sunrise-ish, prime, first hour, terce, mid-morning, sext, noonish, nones, mid-afternoon, vespers, evening, and compline, night prayer. Depending on where you lived, some of these got skipped or merged. To a monk, each bell was a summons to prayer. To a baker, a set of living timers. And because bells varied, some cracked, some dull, some enthusiastically rung by teenagers who probably shouldn't be left unsupervised with rope. You had to learn your specific village's rhythm. Your ear became a finely tuned thing. You could tell who was ringing the bell by the way it swayed. You knew when the bell was late because the sunlight on your work table felt wrong. You developed a sixth sense for when it was almost time to shape, bake, or feed the starter again. Historians still debate whether medieval bakers adjusted their schedules seasonally or stuck to rigid bell-based timings. After all, sunrise changes, but the bells don't always keep up. Some argue that in winter, dough took longer, and so bakers added extra bulk fermentation time. Others think the church bell schedule flexed slightly with the seasons. Still others suspect that nobody really noticed, because half the town was half asleep all year anyway. You watch a boy run past with a wheel of cheese under one arm. He's being chased by a goat. You don't ask questions. You just sip from a clay mug of weak beer and watch the show. Another bell chimes. Vespers. Evening prayer. For you, it means one thing. Fetch the baskets, clean the table, prep the next day's mix. The baskets are stored in the loft above the bakery. Rough, shallow willow affairs that look more like oversized bird nests than baking tools. You climb the creaky ladder, careful not to jostle the rafters where a family of sparrows has taken up residence. Again. You swear the head baker is secretly feeding them. Back downstairs, you dust each basket with flour. Not too much. Too much, and it cakes the crust. Too little, and your dough sticks like gossip in a small town. As you set the baskets in order, your hands move without thought. It's the rhythm of repetition, of doing the same thing day after day, until it becomes less a task and more a kind of quiet ceremony. You lift, dust, stack, lift, dust, stack. Outside, the world grows dim. Smoke from hearths curls above the thatched rooftops. A dog barks in the distance. A baby cries. A door slams with dramatic flair. Probably Agnes again. She always had a talent for exits. You think about tomorrow's mix. Should you try a bit more rye? That Miller claims his latest batch is less bitter. Of course, he also once claimed his donkey could count, so you're skeptical. You jot a quick note with your charcoal stub on the wall slate. Nothing fancy, just more rye, less salt. Your handwriting looks like a goose stepped in ink, but it's legible enough. From the pantry, you retrieve the starter. It lives in a wide bowl covered with a cloth that used to be white, probably sometime during the last crusade. The starter smells sour and slightly fruity. A good sign. You feed it with a bit of flour and water, stir it slowly, and watch the bubbles rise like tiny yawns. That's the heartbeat of the whole operation, right there. The starter, older than you. Maybe older than the town, if you believe the head baker's dramatic tales. If you kill it, the bread dies. If you keep it alive, your oven has a soul. As you clean up, your fingers trail over the edge of the wooden table again. That one scar, the deep gouge near the center, you remember that. The day the bishop's nephew dropped an entire sack of salt into the dough. You couldn't even be mad. The loaf that came out of that batch made your eyes water for a week, but the smell? Still perfect. It's fully dark now. Another bell, compline, night prayer. For some, time for reflection. For others, bed. For you, one last task, covering the cooling loaves with a linen cloth to keep out dust and nosy mice. You pull the cloth over them like a blanket and sigh. The day is almost done. You stretch, your back cracking like kindling. You move slowly now, deliberately. The kind of tired that isn't painful, just full, like a well-kneaded dough. risen and ready. You wake before the bells. It's still dark, though not the pitch black kind. It's more that early velvet gray where even the stars seem sleepy. A thin ribbon of cool air seeps through the shutters and dances along the floor. You sit up slowly, joints murmuring complaints like an old gossip. There's no alarm clock, just instinct, and maybe the sourdough starter, which somehow always knows when it's time to rise. You light the little oil lamp, shielding it with your hand as the flame flutters to life. The glow catches on flour-dusted shelves, hanging ladles, and that odd little wooden spoon carved to look like a fox. No one remembers where that came from, but it stirs batter like a champion. In the next room, the head baker is snoring gently, a sound somewhere between a cow's sigh and a rusty hinge. You let him sleep. He'll take the later shift today. In the stillness, your bare feet pad softly across the stone floor. You go to check on your starter. It's bubbly, alive, a sleepy volcano of quiet fizzing. You begin the morning's mix. The flour sack is heavier than usual, new grain. You run your hands through it, feel the coarse texture, sniff it. Earthy, a bit nutty, promising. You scoop generous handfuls into the mixing trough, add yesterday's saved water, still cool from the well, and then fold in the starter with slow, practiced movements. There's no rush. And here comes your familiar companion, the first bell. Lauds. It rings slow and low, like someone yawning through metal. A sleepy summons for the monks to begin their prayers. For you, it means your dough's autolyse begins. You let it rest, relaxing in the trough just as you rest your hands on the edge of the wooden table. This is a rhythm you've known for years. Bells instead of clocks, bubbles instead of timers. You wait. The dough waits. And in that quiet space, you notice how the air shifts ever so slightly as dawn leans in. When prime tolls, another bell, slightly sharper this time, you return to knead. It's work, but not the grunting kind, more of a gentle pressing, a folding like you're tucking in a very large floppy child. The dough resists, then yields, like it's arguing for fun. Your shoulders roll with the motion, your elbows tucked in close, your body becoming part of the rhythm. The yeast works slowly, lazily stretching itself out as you go. Historians still debate whether medieval bakers understood yeast in the way we do today. Most likely, they didn't. The common view was that bread rose because it had been blessed by time and warmth, and a bit of luck. You nod at the thought. Maybe luck still plays a part. The dog from 2 doors down wanders into the open back door. You glance over. Not for you, you mutter softly. He knows. He curls up near the warmest stone and falls asleep. Again. He might actually bake less than you do. The dough finishes its first knead. You leave it to rise and begin setting the oven. There's no dial, no gauge, just instinct and flame. You gather twigs, then logs, carefully selected yesterday. Not too green, not too wet. You build the fire in the oven's belly, coaxing the kindling to catch like whispering to a baby chick. The oven yawns awake, cracking and creaking. Warmth spills across your feet. Some bakers test oven heat with scraps of parchment or by tossing in a handful of flour and seeing how fast it darkens. Others, perhaps less sensibly, stick in an arm and gauge by feel. You're somewhere in between. You know by scent, by how fast your breath fogs near the opening, by how the smoke curls. Another bell. Terse time to shape the loaves. You punch down the dough, gently, like you're negotiating with a soft pillow, and divide it. Your knife slides through like it's parting clouds. You scoop each portion into your hands, tucking and folding, shaping the round or oval loaves depending on the day's order. For the richer households, you score the tops with gentle patterns, crosses, circles, spirals. Not too deep, just enough to whisper decoration. You line the shaped dough in floured baskets and set them near the oven's warmth for the final rise. The heat is steady now, like the sun napping indoors. There's a knock at the door. You open it to find the town's messenger boy holding a folded scrap of parchment. You sigh. It's another urgent request from the mayor's wife. Something about poppy seeds and softness and that golden crust you managed last feast day. You nod politely. Close the door. Add a handful of poppy seeds to a couple loaves. Roll your eyes only once. Outside, a cart rolls by carrying turnips the size of small dogs. You stare, just for a second. You make a mental note. Trade bread for turnips later. Soup's been thin lately. Back inside, the final rise is nearly done. The bell rings again. 6th. Midday. Time to bake. You use your peel to slide the loaves in, one by one. The oven breathes them in, its mouth glowing orange, hungry but patient. The scent starts immediately, flour turning golden, crust beginning to crackle. You lean back on your heels. Listen. Wait. Now comes the subtle art of using the bells like oven timers. From sex to nones, you know there are roughly 3 tolls. If your dough went in on the first toll of sext, then the first chime of nones means pull the small loaves. Second chime, the bigger rounds. Third, if they're still in, you'll have biscuits hard enough to chisel with. You check through the oven's side vent with your paddle. Crust's browning. One crackles as the steam escapes in a puff. Perfect. You smile. Historians still argue about how consistent baking quality really was in towns without thermometers or mechanical timers. Some say skilled bakers achieved remarkable consistency using nothing more than feel and bells. Others believe that most loaves came out, edible-ish, with a bit of prayer. You like to think it's a mix of both. The second toll of sext echoes faintly. You slide out the first batch, golden, firm hollow when tapped. You nod as if to say, yes, this is bread. The head baker stumbles in at last, scratching his beard with one hand, reaching for a crust with the other. You smack his wrist with your paddle. He grunts and sits. Outside, children chase each other down the alley. A market seller yells about onions. Somewhere, a sheep bleats with the urgency of someone who's misplaced a friend. And inside, you sit beside your fresh bread, the bells still echoing in your bones. You lean your elbow on the counter, watching steam rise from the loaves. The scent of warm crust, yeasty, toasty, slightly nutty, fills the bakery like a fog you wouldn't mind getting lost in. You rub your palms together to shake off the flour dust, but really, it's never going to come off completely. That's just how bakers' hands are. Always dusted, always ready. The bell of nones sounds, low and distant, like someone dropping a stone into a pond of air. The time between sext and nones is what you've come to think of as the golden hour, not just for baking, but for town gossip. As if on cue, the baker's apprentice, young Alric, bursts through the side door. His cloak is flapping like he was chased by a goose, again, and he's got that grin that usually means he heard something mildly scandalous. "Did you know?" he pants. "The blacksmith's daughter is courting the spice merchant's son?" He pauses for effect. even after what happened at last winter's solstice. You raise an eyebrow, but say nothing. You already know the spice merchant's son prefers embroidery to metallurgy, and that the blacksmith's daughter has no interest in either. But you let Alric have his moment. You hand him a roll instead. He chomps in happily. In medieval towns like this one, the bakery often becomes the quiet hub of the neighborhood, equal parts hearth, whispering post, and olfactory lighthouse. The bells guide the workday, yes, but they also signal the changing rhythms of community life. You start noticing who walks past at which bell, who lingers at sext, who always appears just before compline. A woman peeks in now, Henrietta, the seamstress with the eternally crooked bonnet. She trades you a scrap of dried apple for a small heel of bread. A fair deal. She hums as she leaves. Outside, the sun is inching westward, casting warm yellow fingers over the cobblestones. Inside, the oven crackles as the last logs collapse into ember. You set out the second batch of loaves to cool. These are for the wealthier townsfolk, slightly larger, brushed with egg to give them that sun-kissed sheen. There's even one spiced loaf laced with cinnamon, a rare luxury, smuggled in through trade routes that probably involved bribery, bad maps, and at least one very confused camel. Historians still debate how widely spices were actually available in provincial towns. Some argue that only nobles could afford them, while others point to records showing bakers like you could occasionally barter for cloves or saffron when merchants passed through. Either way, you use them sparingly, both for flavor and mystique. You arrange the loaves in neat rows, careful to alternate sizes and shapes. Presentation matters, especially to the steward of the abbey, who insists on symmetry as a sign of divine order. You once gave him a crooked loaf just to see what he'd do. He prayed over it for an hour. You glance at the sun again. It's nearly time for vespers, the evening bell. That gives you just enough time to clean the mixing trough, scrape the ashes from the hearth, and sprinkle fresh straw around the floor. Not for comfort, just for absorbing the inevitable flour and crumbs. A young boy runs past the window outside, holding a chicken under one arm and laughing like he's just gotten away with something important. You wonder what that's about. You make a mental note. Check if the chicken lady is missing inventory. As you sweep, you think about how your work isn't measured in hours or coin, but in bells. Every task is paced by sound. There are no written schedules, no alarms, no digital anything. Just the metal song of time echoing from the church tower, wrapped in wind and routine. You've learned the subtle differences in each bell too. The high clang when the wind is strong from the east, the muted thud after a storm, when the bell ropes are still damp. Once, during a frost, the bell rang so sharply you could feel it in your teeth. You baked faster that day, probably too fast. The vespers bell rings, solemn and long. It's time to prepare tomorrow's batch. You pull out the clay jars that hold your rye flour, sift through the barley, decide on a mix. Maybe something with oats this time, something hearty. The town's getting colder, and people will want denser bread to go with their cabbage stew and long nights. You feed the starter again, adding fresh water and a scoop of flour, stirring until it breathes and bubbles. It smells faintly sour, like wet stone and apples. You smile. That means it's healthy. Alric is back, scrubbing trays with more enthusiasm than skill. He hums tunelessly. You notice he's burned one of the handles. Again? You ask gently. He shrugs. The tray started it. You decide not to argue. Instead, You hand him the tray of spiced bread for delivery to the steward. He salutes. Poorly, but you let him go. His heart's in the right place, even if his tray handling is not. As the light fades, you lock up the side door and take a moment to breathe. This quiet moment, when the bread is done, the fire's out, and the world hasn't gone completely dark yet, is your favorite. You lean against the doorway, arms crossed, and listen as the town begins to settle. The bells have guided you all day. You never once looked at a clock. There isn't one. There never was. You know time by scent, by dough, by the way your shoulders ache right before sext. Historians still argue whether medieval workers were more or less stressed than modern ones. Some say the bells gave comforting structure. Others argue they were an inescapable leash. You think maybe both? You stretch once, slowly, and reach for the small heel of bread left over. It's a little too crusty, a little too dark, but still warm, still yours. You tear off a bite, let the crumbs fall, and chew slowly. The last bell of the evening, Compline, isn't far off, and when it comes, you'll let it rock you to sleep, same as always. The Compline bell rings low and slow, like someone sighing into metal. By now, the town has grown hushed, the air thick with the smell of wood smoke and the occasional stew still bubbling over hearths. You step back into your tiny sleeping nook beside the bakery's rear wall. It's nothing more than a cot, a thin blanket, and a niche for your boots. But after a day spent elbow deep in dough, it feels like heaven. You stretch your legs out and listen. Church bells in the distance fade into the night, swallowed by crickets and the soft chatter of a neighbor quarreling with their geese. You smile. You're too tired to eavesdrop properly. Your limbs ache, but it's the good kind of ache. Honest, earned. As your eyelids start to droop, a familiar thought nudges you awake again. Tomorrow is delivery day. You groan quietly. Delivery days start before even the first bell. No rest for the bread weary. At first light, well before prime, you're back on your feet. The oven, still warm from yesterday's bake, makes your little room surprisingly cozy, which unfortunately makes getting up feel like betrayal. But you do it anyway. You always do. Outside, the sky hasn't fully turned. It's that murky pre-dawn gray that makes everything feel like it's underwater. The cobblestones are slick with dew, your breath a puff of mist. The town is still asleep, except for the bakery, and the church tower, of course. It stands like a sentinel, waiting to speak again. Today's deliveries are more important than usual. The Abbey has ordered 12 loaves, all uniform, all blessedly unsour. The tanner's apprentice wants 3 rough rounds for his master, and the mayor's steward sent word by candlelight last night. 2 cardamom knots. You didn't even know you had cardamom. You hitch up your sack, carefully arrange the bread, and step into the street. The silence is deeper now, like the town is holding its breath. No bells yet, just you and your footsteps. The first stop is the Abbey. You pass the smithy, where the air still smells of iron and horses. The door is shut, but a single lantern glows behind the shutters. You guess he's still working, or arguing with his wife, or both. At the Abbey gate, Brother Elias meets you with a nod. He's a small, wiry man who always smells faintly of wax. He takes the loaves without speaking, places a wrapped bundle in your hands, and retreats like a well-trained cat. You open it later. It's honeycomb and a dried fig. Payment enough. On your way to the tanner's, the sun finally peeks over the hills. It lights up the spires in gold, turning the gray stone into something almost holy. You pause, not out of reverence, though the moment earns it, but to let the warmth hit your cheeks. That's when the bell for prime rings. And suddenly, the town exhales. Windows open. Doors creak. Roosters pretend they were awake all along. You're no longer alone. The tanner's shop smells like every nightmare you've ever had about wet leather and old meat. You hand the apprentice the bread, try not to breathe through your nose, and accept a small pouch of coins in return. He thanks you with the enthusiasm of a stump. The steward's house is last. He's awake already, of course. He's always awake. He invites you in, but you decline politely. Something about his furniture always makes you feel sticky. Instead, you hand him the cardamom knots through the door. He sniffs them, nods solemnly, and says, "They smell obedient." You have no idea what that means. You back away slowly. Historians still argue whether delivery work like yours was reserved for apprentices or done by master bakers. Some guild records suggest it was considered beneath the master's dignity. Others show masters, especially in smaller towns, doing the rounds themselves. You suspect the truth is simple. Whoever was willing to get up early enough did it. With your satchel empty and your boots now crusted with city dust, you make your way back to the bakery. Along the way, a sleepy child waves from a window. You wave back. He disappears like a ghost. You pass the market square. A fishmonger is just setting up, slapping down his catch with a splat that echoes. He looks at you, nods, then opens a barrel of eels like it's a bouquet of roses. You remind yourself not to eat fish today. By the time you return, Alric is already sweeping the floor with more vigor than accuracy. He's got flour in his hair and a smudge on his nose that he either doesn't notice or proudly wears like a scar. "You missed the mayor's cat trying to steal the dough," he says without looking up. You blink. "We don't bake for cats." She didn't care. Back at the counter, the morning bake has begun. You knead quietly, letting the rhythm take over. Your hands know what to do. Push, fold, turn, again, again. The bell for terce rings, time for loaves to go in. You realize, somewhere in all of this, that you haven't actually looked at the sky in hours. You glance out the window now. It's fully bright, though the sun is stubbornly dodging a thick patch of clouds. The light is soft, like butter left out too long. You pause. Not for drama, just because in that exact moment, as the bell's echo fades and the oven sighs with heat, everything feels perfectly, precisely timed. And not because of any clock, but because the bells told you so. By mid-morning, the bakery hums with heat, flour dust, and the sort of quiet chaos that only happens when no one's exactly sure if it's too early for complaints. Alric mutters about the mayor's cat again. Apparently it returned, this time with backup in the form of a pigeon, and you just nod, too focused on shaping the dough into tight, even rounds to truly register the avian conspiracy unfolding. The bell for Sext hasn't rung yet, but you can feel it coming, like the slow swell of a yawn you've been holding back. It's not the sound itself you're anticipating, it's what it marks. The last oven load before the midday lull, the end of your morning labor, and the beginning of the town's long lunch pause. That's the strange thing about this world you now move through. You never really look at the sun anymore. The bells do it for you. They've become your sky. You slide the loaves into the oven with the wooden peel, that wide, flat paddle that always seems a little too large for comfort. The fire's been banked to the perfect warmth, not blazing, just a steady, glowing breath. You shut the oven door, then lean back against the counter, pressing the warm wood against your spine. Alric yawns without apology. Do you ever think about baking somewhere else? Like somewhere with fewer rats? You glance at the ceiling where, sure enough, you hear a scuttle followed by a thump. Rats, you say. Just appreciate our crust. It gets a snort out of him. A small win. You check the shelf of shaped dough, watching how the proofing process is going. Some loaves are rising with enthusiasm. Others are still debating the matter. That's the thing about yeast. It's moody, and it doesn't care how many orders you have to fill. Historians still debate how reliable medieval bakers' methods were when it came to proofing times and temperature control. With no thermometers, no measuring cups, and certainly no digital timers, they relied on instinct, environmental cues, and of course those bells. Take the sext bell, for example. It rings around midday, and not just to call monks to prayer. For bakers, it often signaled the close of the morning bake. Anything not in the oven by then risked fermenting too far, or not enough. Or just enough to get you yelled at by someone who thinks bread should be soft on the inside and hard enough on the outside to knock out a thief. The sext bell finally tolls. It's a bright, almost cheerful clang, like someone accidentally dropped a halo. You exhale, the way you do when you realize you've made it to lunch without burning the place down. The loaves are done, golden, firm, their crusts crackling slightly as they cool. You stack them carefully, like prized books, and let them rest. Lunch today is surprise bread, but also some cheese traded from the peddler last week, and a few bruised apples the miller's wife brought over in exchange for day-old rolls. You eat standing up, mostly because there's nowhere to sit that isn't dusted in flour or likely to collapse. The cheese is strong enough to make your eyes water. You love it. Across the street, the bell ringer, young Margot, with arms like a blacksmith's and a singing voice that could terrify wolves, leans out of the tower window to stretch. You wave. She gives you a salute with a clapper mallet. She's stronger than both of us, Alric says, licking cheese off his thumb. She also never burns a batch, you reply. Maybe she should be the baker. He looks genuinely worried for a moment. Then you both laugh. Once lunch is done, the bakery settles into a slower rhythm. The fire dims, the air cools slightly, and the kneading table is wiped down with a cloth so old it may have seen the Crusades. Afternoon in the bakery is less about hustle and more about prep. Soaking seeds, cleaning tools, tallying orders, and waiting for none. The none bell, sounding around 3 p.m., is your quiet signal to start the dough for tomorrow, not to bake it, just to begin. The flour gets sifted, which mostly just means you catch the bugs trying to pass for raisins. The water, drawn fresh from the barrel, and the starter, your bubbling, living pride and joy, is stirred gently like it might be listening. Here's something few people realize. Bread doesn't start with baking. It starts with feeding. Your starter, the mother culture of wild yeast and bacteria, is as much a pet as it is a tool. You whisper apologies when you forget to feed it. You praise it when it rises on command. You threaten it softly when it gets sluggish. And today it's frisky. You scoop out a ladleful and mix it with flour and water in a wide wooden bowl. It comes together like a wet sponge, sticky, shaggy, alive. And that's when the bell for 0 rings. It's a mellow tone, less assertive than prime, less urgent than vespers. It sounds like it's saying, hey, maybe think about moving a little. If you want. You smile, cover the dough, and let it rest. Outside, the sun is still holding on, though the edges of the sky are beginning to go gold. You open the front door, lean against the frame, and just listen. The town is busy again. Children laughing, carts rolling, someone shouting about geese. But under it all, you can still hear the bells. Always the bells. You never imagined that timing your entire day off church sounds would be comforting. But here you are, wrapped in rhythms older than most of the buildings around you, guided not by clocks, but by clangs. And you think, just for a moment, that maybe those bells are less about religion and more about rhythm, like a heartbeat or a metronome for a town trying to remember who it is. The dough gurgles softly behind you. Alric is humming an off-key song about a goat. And the world, for now, is exactly on schedule. The hours between none and vespers drift by like flour on a lazy breeze. You move with less urgency now, your arms heavy from the morning's labor, but your mind alert, counting and recalculating as you prep tomorrow's ingredients. The bakery takes on the tone of a sleepy animal, still breathing, but curled in upon itself. You clean out the ash from the oven's mouth, the soot clinging like a stubborn child. Then you sweep the floor again, even though it'll be covered in flour within the hour. There's something therapeutic in the rhythm of sweeping. You don't question it. Vespers comes next. Around this time, roughly 6 p.m., the town's energy softens. The Vespers bell doesn't shout. It sighs. Long and low, it echoes down the lanes and courtyards, brushing over rooftops and curling into your bakery like an old friend. For a baker, Vespers isn't a signal to stop. It's a hand on the shoulder saying, almost there. This is when you feed your sourdough starter again, fold the baiga, the early dough mix, and make final adjustments for tomorrow's rise. It's a quieter kind of work now. Less fire, more fermentation. You sit for a moment beside the open door, eating the last crust of the day's bread with a smear of gooseberry preserve. It's tart and messy, and it drips down your wrist. And you don't care. The town smells like sheep, damp stone, and wood smoke. "Did you hear about the tanner's wife?" Alric asks, appearing beside you. "She ran off with the miller?" "No, better. She started her own tannery. Claims women can tan better." You snort. They probably can. Historians still argue whether medieval trades like baking were strictly male-dominated, or if women quietly did more than their fair share. Records are spotty, but we know that widows of bakers often took over their husbands' shops, and some never gave them back. You're not surprised. This work isn't about brute strength. It's about patience, precision, and surviving near-constant low-level chaos. Frankly, women might have done it better. Inside the bakery, you knead by feel now. The dough is soft but not sticky, yielding but not lazy. The first few times you tried this, it felt impossible, like wrestling a sluggish octopus. But now it's like a conversation. You push, it yields. You fold, it tightens. You rest, it breathes. There's a kind of intimacy in bread making that feels secret, like you're not just baking, but listening, responding, translating something ancient with your hands. And here comes another bell. The Angelus. Some towns don't ring it separately from Vespers, but yours does. It's a triple toll, each pause slightly longer than the last. You feel it more than you hear it, the way you feel a bass drum in your chest. The bell says, stop what you're doing and pray. But for you, it says, check the fire, double wrap the starter, write down your flour tally. You do all three. Outside, The last market carts roll home. Children throw stones at each other and call it a game. Somewhere nearby, someone starts playing a lute, badly. You light the tiny oil lamp above the back table. Its glow is the color of honey. Everything is quiet now, except the dough rising gently in its wooden bowl and the fire that hasn't quite died. In the corner, Alric is snoring, face down on a sack of barley. He always says he's just resting his spine. You throw a rag over him, which feels oddly parental. Then you run a fingertip through flour on the table and doodle something ridiculous, a stick figure with huge buns and a chef's hat. This is your life. Every day is the same, but also never quite. There's a calming predictability to it. Dough doesn't lie, bells don't skip, and while no two loaves are truly identical, there's comfort in the striving, the pursuit of something golden, something warm. You wonder, not for the first time, if bakers ever wrote poetry, or if bread was their poem. Maybe they didn't need metaphors when they had yeast and time. And then, just as you're dusting your hands and considering whether your shoes are edible enough to pass for dinner, another sound comes. It's not a bell this time. It's laughter. From the street. High, clear, contagious. Someone just told a joke good enough to echo off the chapel wall. You don't hear the joke, but you hear the joy. That, too, is part of the rhythm. You blow out the lamp. Let the fire fade. Cover the dough with its linen shroud and whisper something soft to it, just in case dough has ears. The day is almost done. The last loaf has been sold, the last crust eaten. The bells have done their job, and so have you. You wake up in the dark, not because of a bell this time, but because your nose itches. The air smells like damp wool and smoke, and there's a weight in your chest that says it's not quite morning, but also not truly night. A kind of medieval twilight zone where time goes fuzzy, and everything feels just slightly off. You reach up and scratch your nose. Flour. Always flour. Even in sleep. Alric is muttering nonsense in his sleep. Something about a talking duck and a bread thief. You don't ask. You've learned better. The reason you're awake, really, is the oven. Even in your half-sleep, you know, it's time to bank the fire. Back in the earliest part of the day, just after matins, you'll need your oven to be perfectly, almost invisibly hot. Not screaming with flames, not smoky. Just the kind of heat that glows like a hidden sun. So now, in this in-between hour, you feed it one last offering. A bundle of dry wood wrapped in the papery skin of old onions. It crackles like applause. You smile despite yourself. Historians still debate the exact oven techniques used in different regions. Some suggest a combination of radiant stone and smothered ash. Others believe medieval bakers had their own intuitive rituals. You, of course, go with the onion bundle. It works, usually. You glance outside. The street is empty but not entirely silent. Somewhere, a dog coughs. The wind pushes something metallic. A pot lid? Down the cobbled road with a rattle that sounds faintly annoyed. It's the hour before lauds, technically. The hour of owls and foxes. The hour when secrets are whispered and dreams are traded for bread. You sit for a moment near the glowing coals. Not exactly warm, but not cold either. This is when you write your thoughts in flour on the tabletop, because paper is too expensive, and you're not that interesting anyway. Tonight, you trace the outline of a bell. Funny thing, those bells that govern your day, they weren't always meant for bakers. They were meant for monks, Benedictine monks, to be specific. Around the 6th century, they developed a strict daily schedule called the Liturgy of the Hours, prayers and chants spaced throughout the day, guided by bells. Over time, those bells echoed beyond monastery walls, slowly regulating the rhythms of entire towns. You, a flower-covered mortal with no vows beyond the dough, have become a satellite of those ancient tolls. You've never seen a monastery, but you hear one every day. Even now, sitting by your sleepy oven, you imagine a monk doing exactly what you're doing, tending fire in silence, listening for the next bell. Back then, they called this hour vigils. Fitting, because you are, in fact, keeping vigil over your loaves yet to come. You peek inside the oven. Perfect. The coals are now white-hot, calm, patient, the kind of heat that lingers, that won't scorch, that just waits. You smile. Tomorrow's bread will be good. And with that, you tip your head back against the cool stone wall and let your eyes flutter shut. Just for a moment. Just until the next bell. But of course, time keeps trickling, and sleep is always a thief. You dream of ridiculous things. Of a giant loaf of bread being used as a boat. Of a choir of bakers humming Gregorian chants while shaping pretzels. Of a bell with legs sprinting down the street yelling, "You're late." You wake with a start. It's lauds. The bell rings slow and rich, like a spoon in a deep bowl. You stretch, bones popping like old dough. Ulrich, ever dramatic, rolls off his barley sack and lands with a grunt. You're both up. It's go time again. You wipe your hands on your apron, though they're not dirty yet. The dough you prepped before Vespers has risen into soft, pillowy clouds. The sourdough starter has that ripe smell, somewhere between beer, apples, and mild arrogance. The oven glows like it's holding in a secret. It's time to bake. This is the quietest moment of the day. No clamor. No market. Just you, your sleepy assistant, the dough, and the glow. You don't speak as you shape the loaves. Each one gets a quick, confident slash with a dull blade. That mark isn't decoration. It's a practical vent, but also maybe a kind of signature. Some bakers in Germany developed elaborate scoring patterns to represent their families, their guilds, or even their political loyalties. Yours is a simple X. Classic, unassuming, reliable, like you. As you slide the first loaves into the oven, you feel a strange little thrill. You've done this 1,000 times, and yet it never gets old. There's magic in it. You take raw, wet, lifeless dough, expose it to fire, and out comes warmth, nourishment, crusty brown comfort. The bell doesn't ring now. It doesn't have to. You already know what time it is. Steam curls from the mouth of the oven like a secret exhaled. You lean in slightly, not too close, just enough to get a whiff of that early crust forming. It smells like everything good you've ever done, and a few mistakes you got away with. Ulrich is humming under his breath, some tune you can't place. It's off-key, but oddly soothing. The hum of a tired apprentice baking in rhythm with the heart of a town that doesn't even know he's awake. Now that the loaves are in, it's a waiting game. You sit, elbows on knees, watching the oven like a hawk, a very sleepy hawk in an apron. This is when the real artistry comes in. Medieval ovens don't have timers or thermometers. There are no blinking lights, no digital dings. Just a seasoned eye, a nose trained by habit, and, most curiously of all, a system of external cues. Which brings us back to the bells. In your little town, as in many others across medieval Europe, Church bells do more than call the faithful to prayer. They give structure to the entire day, even to the pagan farmer, the moody weaver, the gossiping laundress, and to you, a baker counting down minutes in the language of sound. At this hour, your next cue comes not from the baker's instinct alone, but from a predictable toll, the bell that rings at prime. 7 sharp strikes, low and slow. You don't even glance outside anymore. You feel them in your chest. Each chime gives you a sense of where your bread is inside that sealed stone chamber. Some regions even had secondary bells, gentler ones, rung by sub-sacristans to signal the midpoint between major prayer hours. In a sense, it's like having a snooze button, but for dough. Historians still argue whether medieval bakers relied entirely on church bells, or whether they had other acoustic aids, like rhythmical street sounds or crowing roosters. Likely, it was a blend of cues. After all, people used what they had. You use everything. You tap the wooden peel against the oven's lip, not to stir the loaves, just to listen. You've learned to tell a lot by sound. The echo inside the chamber tells you which side is hotter. The hiss of steam escaping tells you the moisture level. A faint crackling? That means crust is forming, and the loaves are caramelizing just right. Alric peers in over your shoulder. "Do you ever name them?" he asks, voice groggy. "The loaves?" He nods. "Not allowed," you say, which isn't technically a lie. You used to name them after saints, after songs, after strange dreams and foolish people. But eventually they all turned into breakfast, and it felt too personal. Still, every now and then, there's a loaf that rises just so, round and proud, and you feel a flicker of affection. Today, it's the one in the back left. You call him Bertrand. The bell rings again. This time, it's from a smaller chapel down the road. You don't need it, but it's a nice confirmation. Time to check the crust. You open the oven, just a crack. A wave of heat rolls out, thick and dry like a desert sigh. The crusts have browned beautifully. Tiny cracks are forming, and one has even split just a little more than usual, revealing the soft belly within. You close the door gently, like tucking in a child. It'll need just 5 more minutes. You remember something the older bakers used to say. The bread isn't done when you think it's ready. It's done when it forgives you for watching. And so you wait, hands in your lap, eyes on nothing, mind slightly blank. It's the closest you get to meditation. 5 minutes pass slowly, in the way they only do when bread is involved. You open the oven again. This time, it's ready. Using the long wooden peel, you ease the loaves out one by one, arranging them on a thick linen cloth like royal infants. Their crusts crackle audibly as they meet the cooler air. Some medieval bakers called this the bread whisper. You hold one up to your ear, for no reason other than ritual. It tells you, all is well. Bertrand looks perfect. You don't say it aloud. Alric brings a basin of water, and together you dab the tops of the loaves to soften the crusts just slightly. This trick, sometimes done with ale instead of water, adds a soft sheen and a bit of tenderness. In Paris, bakers use rose water. In Venice, they use olive oil. You, just well water and your own stubbornness. The first customers begin to stir. You hear the creak of shutters, the echo of a broom brushing stone, the clatter of hooves on damp cobble. But for now, they don't matter. This moment, this golden, fragrant moment, is yours. You wipe your hands on your apron and nod once at Alric, who's already sneaking a piece off a cooling heel. You let him. He's earned it. Besides, the bell will ring again soon, and there will be more to do. Always more to do. But for now, you lean back, take in the smell of victory, and smile. Bertrand was a good loaf. The streets begin to stir outside, gently at first. The distant creak of a cartwheel, the clink of a bucket lowered into a well, the yawning chorus of chickens with no sense of personal boundaries. You're back inside, the loaves cooling behind you like a warm battalion lined up for inspection. Their crusts still crackle in the way only fresh bread can, like tiny applause for your efforts. But now comes the curious part of the day, the part that involves you stepping out of your warm, yeasty cocoon and facing the townsfolk. Because in a town like this, bread isn't just food. It's politics. It's social standing. It's rumor. It's religion. And occasionally, it's bribery. You open the side door and glance out. The bread queue has already started. A dozen or so figures, bundled in shawls or cloaks, each waiting with their little woven basket, their coins tucked in a handkerchief or sleeve. Bread buying in medieval times wasn't just transactional, it was performative. The widow who always haggles. The night's cook who wants the big ones and won't accept otherwise. The priest's housemaid who flirts just enough to get a crust thrown in for free. They all come, like clockwork. And you? You play your part. The quiet baker with the flour-smeared arms and the faint scent of nutmeg. You remember what your master once told you. They come for bread, but they return for consistency. Still, nothing gets handed over until the town bell chimes again. This time, it's the tierce bell, the one signaling the third hour after sunrise. For most, it marks mid-morning chores. For you, it means your stall can open. Because here's the secret. In some towns, bakers weren't even allowed to sell before the church bell rang. Local ordinances controlled when and how bread could be sold, weighed, and inspected. This was to avoid fraud. Yes, bread fraud was a thing, and to ensure fairness for everyone, even the grumpiest farmer at the back of the line. Historians still debate whether these rules were strictly enforced or casually ignored. Some say bakers worked around them with hush bread sales out the back door. Others argue the bell's authority was ironclad. In truth, it probably depended on the town, the year, and how much the baker had annoyed the bailiff. In your case, you follow the rules. Mostly. Tierce bell rings, 9 deep, deliberate strikes, and the line perks up like geese spotting spilled grain. You open the stall flap. The scent of fresh bread hits the crowd like incense. They sigh, shuffle forward, and begin the ritual. You hand over round loaves for copper pennies, long ones for silver half-groats. You've memorized faces and preferences. That tall miller's wife, she wants crusty corners. The carpenter's twins, they get the soft middles. And the bailiff's cousin's daughter, she gets whatever is closest to burnt, because you still haven't forgiven her for the time she said your bread was dry. Behind the stall, Alric keeps tally marks on a slate board, licking a finger to count every 10th sale. This helps you track the moment the tax collector swings by. You're allowed to keep most of the profits, but a slice always goes to the guild, the church, or the town council, depending on whose week it is. Every few minutes, someone asks a question about the bread. Is this yesterday's? Why's this one darker? Do you still put ground hazelnut in the feast loaves? You smile, nod. Sometimes you lie a little. Mostly, you just make soft sounds of agreement. But today's crowd is especially curious about something else. "What's with the bell timing again?" an old man mutters. "Why not just use a sundial like decent folks?" You chuckle, almost despite yourself. "Because the sun's not in a hurry," you reply. "But the bells? The bells are bossy." And it's true. Bell timing gives structure to an otherwise fluid day. Sundials help you guess, but bells tell you exactly. Plus, they're free to hear, even from the bread stall. In some towns, bakers even coordinated batch starts to the bell sequence. Matins, preheat. Lauds, mix. Prime, knead, tierce, load, sext, sell. It created a rhythm not just in the bakery, but in the entire town. Some likened it to breathing. Rise, fall, rest, repeat. Your town doesn't follow it strictly, but you do, secretly, in your own head. It helps keep the hours soft, predictable, manageable. You glance up at the steeple tower, just as a new visitor approaches the stall. She's young, maybe 14, with a basket and an attitude. Her coin pouch jingles like a songbird. "Any left from the back?" she asks, bold as brass. You raise an eyebrow. The back loaves are usually saved for regulars, but today you reach under the cloth and hand her one. Bertrand's sibling, probably. She sniffs it, nods once, hands you a coin that still smells faintly of sheep grease. "Tell Alric he sings in his sleep," she says over her shoulder as she walks off. You stare after her, eyebrows knit. You didn't think anyone could hear through the bakery walls. Alric shrinks behind the slate board. You say nothing. The bell tower chimes again, this time signaling sext. Midday. The queue is thinning. Your arms ache pleasantly, your apron's a war zone, and you've already started imagining lunch. Maybe a heel of Bertrand with cheese. Maybe something warm, brothy. You sell the last loaf to a monk who gives you a blessing that's longer than necessary, then tuck away the coin box and pull down the flap. It's quieter now. The streets have that soft lull before the afternoon errands resume. You let yourself lean against the stall frame, eyes fluttering closed for a second. Just 1 second. But then a fly lands on your nose, and medieval bliss is shattered. You sneeze. Alric laughs. The bells ring again in the distance. And somewhere in the town square, a rooster crows, 3 hours late. It's the quiet hour now, the lull that stretches just after noon when everyone in town pretends to be busy. But really, they're daydreaming about naps. You wipe your hands on your apron, floury as always with streaks of soot here and there, and head back inside. Alric follows, arms full of the empty bread baskets, still chewing on a corner of a crust you technically didn't sell him. The oven's cooled considerably. It exhales heat like an old hound settling down for a nap. You scrape the remaining ashes into a bucket and leave the heavy door cracked open so it can breathe. This is your least favorite part of the day. Not because it's hard, but because it's quiet. And quiet makes you think. You sit on the stool by the hearth and take a bite of your own lunch. Bread, again, because of course. And a wedge of hard cheese. The kind that bites back a little. Someone left you a dried fig on the shelf. Probably a thank you from one of the nuns. Or maybe a bribe for better loaves tomorrow. Still, the mind drifts. You think about how this started. You weren't born into baking. Most weren't. You got here because a neighbor took you in after your parents died. You were 8, too small for the mill, but just the right size to reach a mixing trough. And once you learned the rhythm, knead, fold, wait, you couldn't unlearn it. Now the bells dictate your day like a quiet choir. prime for rising, tierce for selling, sext for cleaning. None of it is written down. It lives in your bones, the same way some folks hum tunes they don't remember learning. Historians still argue whether medieval bell timing was truly universal. Some towns used their own customs, or rang bells earlier on market days, or even skipped certain prayers in winter. But most agree that monasteries created a pattern, and towns just absorbed it. That's how you got here. A bakery tuned like a church organ. Speaking of churches, today is Wednesday, which means the abbey will place an order soon. The nuns prefer lighter loaves, with softer crumb and less crust. Heavenly texture, one of them once joked, and you almost laughed until she added, dead serious, but no yeast. It's a fast day. You remember that fast days aren't just religious, they're political. In towns like yours, bakers were expected to comply with church orders about what could be sold and when. Fish days, fasting seasons, feast days, all changed what kind of bread people bought. So you adjust. Some days you use barley instead of wheat. Some days it's rye, and occasionally, when the harvest's been bad, you use beans, lentils, or acorn flour. Those are the hardest days. The loaves don't rise well, and the texture is, let's say, politely rustic. Still, people eat them, because bread, in your world, is never optional. It's not a side dish. It's not a snack. It's the table itself. Even bad bread keeps the belly from gnawing itself into knots. There's a knock at the back door. Not the loud one of a customer, but the polite, uncertain knock of someone who doesn't belong in a bakery. You open it, and sure enough, it's the bell ringer's apprentice. He's 12, scrawny, and slightly cross-eyed from looking at ropes too long. He holds out a folded parchment. It's from Brother Joram, he says, shifting his weight like he's worried you'll bite him. You take the note and give him a crust for his trouble. He chomps down immediately and bolts like he's afraid it might be revoked. The note is simple. A reminder that the bells will follow a feast schedule tomorrow. St. Modwena's Day, it reads in cramped, ink-blotted Latin. You sigh. That means bells will ring earlier, and often, which means your oven timings are off, which means less sleep, more prep, and a chaotic day ahead. You crumple the note gently and toss it into the cooling oven. A perfect ceremonial burial. Ulrich peeks in from the front. Did we get a church order? You nod. Feast schedule tomorrow. He groans. Do we get to eat anything fancy or just make it for everyone else? Depends, you say. You still owe me for last week's cinnamon rolls? He glares, half playful. You offered those as a kindness. Kindness has a price. You both chuckle and let the warmth of the bakery wrap around you again. The clock bells chime for none, mid-afternoon, and for a second, you just sit still and breathe. The sounds of the town begin to stir again. Hammers in the distance, the bark of a mangy dog, the gossiping flurry of girls plucking herbs by the stream. You rise from the stool and stretch your arms. Time to start prepping the dough for tomorrow. You glance toward the rising table, already dusted with flour and lined with the mixing troughs. The flour sack stands nearby like an old friend. You pat it once, as though greeting a loyal dog. Tomorrow, the bells will sing earlier. Tomorrow, the dough will need to rise in rhythm with a saint you've never heard of. Tomorrow, your day will begin in the dark. But for now, you have the afternoon. You have flour. You have silence. and you have time, just a little, to get everything ready for when the bells call again. You press your palms into the flour-dusted trough and begin. The dough for tomorrow's loaves needs to rest overnight, especially the fancier ones the Abbey expects for the feast. Richer flours, maybe a touch of honey, and an egg or two if you can convince old Marga the chicken keeper to part with some early. You mix the flour with water first, just enough to create that soft, sticky mess that clings to your fingers like a toddler desperate not to go to bed. You don't mind. The dough always starts out a bit kneady. It gets stronger the more you fold it. Like people. As you knead, you listen. Not just for noise, but for silence. Those small absences of clatter that tell you who's left the square, who's shutting their shutters, and who's still lingering with a gossiping tongue outside the tavern. Some bakers use hourglasses, others use scraps of song. But you use the rhythm of bells and your elbows. Each fold presses out air, encourages gluten to stretch. This part of the process hasn't changed in centuries. Historians still argue whether medieval dough was kneaded on boards, tables, or stone. But most agree that whatever the surface, bakers knew it best through touch. Temperature, texture, stickiness. They didn't need thermometers. They had fingers. Tonight, your fingers tell you the dough is just shy of perfect. So you cover the bowl with a damp cloth, tuck it into the warmest spot near the hearth, and let it rest. You envy it a little. Ulrich's already sweeping out the front room. The way he hums, off-key and fearless, would drive a cat to madness. You don't say a word. He's earned it. The scent of the bakery has shifted again. No longer burning wood or fresh bread. It's now yeast and memory. The kind of smell that lingers in your clothes and hair long after you've gone home. If home even feels like a place anymore. You think of the apprentices you've known. Some vanished off to cities. One joined the army. One married a butcher's daughter and opened a sweet roll stall in the next town over. And one, your favorite, if you're honest, gave up baking entirely and took over her mother's herb shop. Said kneading dough and blending tonics felt exactly the same to her. Maybe she was right. You're old enough now to see that everything repeats. Not perfectly, not on time, but close enough. The Abbey's bells have rung for over 100 years, and they'll ring for 100 more, unless someone gets too clever and replaces them with a mechanical clock. It's already happened in a few cities. You saw one once, in Bruges. The thing ticked and talked like it wanted to be worshipped. You'd rather have the bells, because bells don't lie. You know when sext rings that your dough should be halfway risen. You know when vespers tolls that it's time to bank the coals. You know when compline sounds that you should try, just try, to sleep before the dawn bell calls you back into motion. You're a baker, yes, but you're also a timekeeper. You remember the story of the widow who once sued a baker in this very town for short-weight bread, claimed he skimmed flour during Lent. The judge ordered him to be tied to the church bell and pulled into the air with the rope as punishment. Just once. Just enough to bruise the ribs and the pride. That's the thing about bells. They can ring for justice too. You press your palm against the warm, rising bowl again. Still soft, still rising. Almost there. Outside, the air has cooled. The town prepares for its quiet. Candles are being lit. Pigeons roost under the eaves. The world feels like it's folding in on itself, ready to be tucked under the sheets. Ulrich taps your arm. Did you hear? You look up. They say the bishop's coming next week, inspecting feast preparations. You raise an eyebrow. Will he be tasting? Ulrich grins. Probably. They always do. You sigh, not unhappily. You'll make your best rye honey loaf, the one with the fancy scored top, the one that cracks just a little when it cools and smells like wood smoke and sweetness. You pull the shutters closed, latch the front, and sweep the last of the flour into the bin. In the corner, the old clay hour pot that nobody uses anymore burps a final bubble. You think about tossing it, then decide against it. It's been with the bakery longer than you have. Like the bells, like the hearth. The bell tower rings for Compline. Low, slow, and final. You bow your head, not in prayer exactly. More like habit. More like respect. The same way you'd nod to the oven before sliding in the first loaf. Not because the oven needs your reverence, but because it's seen too much to be taken for granted. You bank the fire. You dust your hands. You pour a trickle of wine from the hidden bottle behind the salt sack and take a sip. The dough's risen enough now. You fold it gently into cloth-lined baskets, cover them, and set them in the cool corner where the night won't steal their warmth, but won't make them too bold either. They'll be perfect by dawn. You blow out the candles, one by one, until the bakery glows only from the oven's ghost light. Outside, the bells have stopped, but you still hear them. In the silence, in your heartbeat, in the soft creak of the wood beneath your feet. They don't need to ring anymore. They've already done their job. You wake before the bell, not because of any alarm, of course. You haven't used one in years. You just know, somewhere in the folds of muscle memory and baker's instinct, that it's time. The room is still dark. The air smells faintly of last night's ash, flour, and that ever-present edge of rising yeast. You stretch your back, feel the ache in your knees, and tug on your apron as if it has magical powers. Maybe it does. You never start the day without it. As you shuffle toward the oven, you pass the proofing baskets. You touch the dough. Still cool, still domed, still perfect. The bell tower hasn't rung yet, but you know it's coming. Outside, the town is still sleeping. Chickens mutter in their coops. A lone cat prowls across a fence, suspicious of everything. The cobbles are damp from dew. The world hasn't fully decided whether to be awake or not. And then, there it is. The first bell. Prime. That long, rising toll that pulls the sun over the hills and whispers, "Get up now. Life's starting again." You light the kindling beneath the oven with practiced hands. The fire responds quickly. It always does when it's been resting just a few hours. You feed it little by little. Too much wood and you'll scorch the crusts. Too little and the centers won't bake through. Balance is everything. Historians still argue whether medieval bakers used thermometers made of glass tubes or just tossed in wisps of straw to check heat levels. You know which one you trust more. You toss in a pinch of flour. It curls into brown smoke in seconds. Too hot. You wait. In the meantime, you open the bakery's shutters. Not the doors yet, just the shutters. Let the light creep in, a soft and sleepy gold. It paints everything with that gentle warmth that makes old wood glow, and iron tools seem romantic instead of grimy. The dough has risen into its final shape, plump, rounded, patterned with your scoring knife's careful slices. Each loaf tells a small story. A diagonal slash means it's the village standard. A crisscross pattern says it's for the abbey. The one with a spiral? That's for the widow 3 doors down. She pays in salt and stories. You start loading the oven with your long wooden peel. Each movement slow, careful, rhythmic. Slide, place, rotate, The loaves nestle into the hot stone like children into a warm bed. You close the oven door. Now you wait. Not long. Just long enough to prep the table, organize the baskets, sip yesterday's water, and stretch your fingers like a musician before a concert. Baking isn't loud, not at first. It's more like listening. You hear tiny cracks as crusts begin to form. You smell the shift when flour becomes bread. You feel the heat against your arms. This moment, more than any other, is when you feel most like a baker. Not during the kneading or shaping, but now, while the dough is becoming something else entirely. Alric arrives late, of course. He yawns as he stumbles through the door, hair in full rebellion. Did I miss anything? You smile. Just bread. He goes to open the front door but pauses. Hear the bell yet? You shake your head. Not yet, but soon. And sure enough, just as you say it, the bell for terse rings. Shorter, brighter than prime, meant for prayer. But to you, it's a timer. It means the crust should be forming firm. The bottom's just beginning to brown. You open the oven slightly, peek inside. Gorgeous. The loaves have risen even more, puffing outward with pride. The crusts are golden, with small cracks that promise softness inside. You tap one gently with your finger. It sounds hollow. Perfect. You begin pulling them out, one by one, with that same sacred rhythm. Lift, slide, cool. The scent fills the bakery. Not just bread, but something older, something essential, like the smell of safety, of comfort, of morning itself. You set the loaves on the cooling rack, and for a moment, just stand there, watching the steam curl, listening to the creak of the shutters in the breeze, knowing that for all the centuries between you and the first baker who ever stood like this, the feeling is probably exactly the same. You glance at the bell tower outside the window. They rang it for prayers, yes, but they also rang it for you, and the next baker, and the one after that. The bell doesn't care about your name. It only cares that you rise, mix, knead, rest, and bake on time. And you do. You always do. The first customer knocks gently on the wooden frame. The village midwife. She smells like mint tea and long nights. You hand her a warm, round loaf. She hands you 3 coins and a folded note. No change, she says. It's for that honey loaf you sent after the twins were born. You nod. They doing well? Louder than the bells, she grins. You smile again, tuck the coins into your pouch, and look toward the bell tower one last time. Still, silent now. Its job is done. And now the fire is soft. The shutters are half closed again, letting in just a ribbon of light. It stretches across the flour-dusted counter like a lazy cat, touching the warm crusts, the woven baskets, the tiny ceramic bowl of salt that's been there longer than your memory. You rest your hands on the table, palms open. You've done what you came here to do. The bell hasn't rung in a while, but you don't need it anymore. It'll be back tomorrow and the next day, singing out across the rooftops like a sleepy old friend. Always on time, always just loud enough to wake you, and soft enough to let the rest of the village drift between dreams a little longer. You step outside for a moment. The stones are warm now. The day has officially arrived. There's bread in your shop, laughter in the square, and 1,000 small stories unfolding that only the bell knows how to tell. Behind you, The oven crackles gently as it cools, a lullaby of wood and ember. You lean against the doorway and breathe in the scent of baked wheat and sunshine. There is nothing left to rush, nothing left to fix. The bread is good, and so is the quiet. So go ahead now, close your eyes. Picture the bell tower, tall, mossy, eternal. Picture your hands resting on warm dough. Picture the rising sun through dusty glass. Let the day fold itself away like a soft linen cloth. You've earned your rest. The world will turn, the fire will sleep, and the bell, whenever it rings again, will be waiting to welcome you back.